Welcome back to the Morning Kickoff Show. I'm your host, Matt Witt. The Minnesota Vikings have progressed to 10-2 on the season after sweeping the AFC East in a 27-22 victory over Mike White and the New York Jets. The Minnesota Vikings now, although they struggled to get going through the air, although they struggled to stop another pass-heavy team, the Minnesota Vikings run game came together. The Minnesota Vikings came together when it mattered on 3rd and 4th down, forcing 5 field goals from Greg the Leg, getting 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 to Alexander Mattison, 1 to Dalvin Cook. And as expected, the Minnesota Vikings struggled yet again, making another quarterback looking like prime Tom Brady or Mike White. Yes, that is Mike White, threw for 369 passing yards. It was not enough as the Minnesota Vikings yet again came together in the red zone and on 3rd down. And although Kirk Cousins struggled throughout 3 quarters, 4th quarter Kirk Cousins is the best quarterback in the NFL. And for the first time in the Kirk Cousins era, he will win the division. Over a win next week against the Detroit Lions, if the Minnesota Vikings come up with a victory, they will have won the NFC North for the first time since 2017. This is Kirk Cousins' division now. This is the Vikings division. We are kings of the North, and we are here to stay. 10-2. Super Bowl 2023, here we come. And now looking at the positives and negatives from this game. Now, there was a lot of negatives and a lot of positives, and just like every week, the Minnesota Vikings made this game come down to the wire. Although it was a 20-3 lead going into halftime, none of us Vikings fans, at least most of us Vikings fans, assumed that this game was going to be competitive nonetheless, because it doesn't matter what opponent we face, we just don't beat up on any opponents. We did against the Packers week 1. Maybe the Packers are just that bad. Other than that, the Minnesota Vikings every week has been a 1-score victory or a blowout loss to the Eagles and Dallas Cowboys. That being said, Minnesota Vikings 10-2 is a great season. Minnesota Vikings, looking at the schedule that we have coming up, it looks very easy. Now, we don't know how good the Giants really are at this point, but other than the Giants, it looks like most of these can be victories for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I don't want to say that really. I don't want to say that the Vikings will win out because I'm going to jinx it, but looking at it for the Minnesota Vikings, our chances of being number 1 seed in the NFC North and getting a first-round bye is very high, and we have almost at this point locked down our division. With the win over the Lions next week, the Vikings will have won the division for the first time since 2017. Some positives for the Minnesota Vikings. Number 1, our 3rd down defense. Our 3rd down defense is insane. I don't understand what is with this Minnesota Vikings team where we make every quarterback look so good. Every running back lights up this defense, but for some reason on 3rd down, our defense can compete. Looking at it for the Minnesota Vikings, the Vikings give up more passing yards than any other team. Yes, that's the most in the NFL when we have played quarterbacks like Mike White and Skylar Thompson who look like prime Tom Brady against this Minnesota Vikings defense. But at the end of the day, coming up with plays on 3rd down, coming up with plays on passing downs is what's held the Minnesota Vikings defense in check. Right now, as of the Minnesota Vikings game against the New York Jets, they only allowed 3 first downs on 3rd down. The Jets had a 3 for 16 3rd down conversion percentage, giving them a 18% 3rd down efficiency. Great from the Minnesota Vikings. And I mean, this is the rare scenario where I'm giving this Minnesota Vikings secondary credit because I have said bad things about this Minnesota Vikings secondary before the season and still today. But as of right now, it looks like this Minnesota Vikings secondary is arguably the worst in this entire league. And while holding the Jets to an 18% 3rd down efficiency is very good, the Jets only punted 2 times in this game. Yes, so while the Minnesota Vikings, we're giving them credit, we're tipping our hat saying great passing down efficiency, the Jets are still in field goal range every time. And this led to 5 field goals from Greg the Leg, one of them being a 60-yard bomb that would have been good for 65. So while the Minnesota Vikings defense, I'm giving them some credit here, we have to continue to say that this has to be the main focus this offseason. Well, your number 1 focus this offseason is how you can get money for Justin Jefferson. Your number 2 focus has to be how can you fix the secondary? Because while injuries are the biggest reason why the Minnesota Vikings secondary is this bad, even with 100% healthy Cam Dantzler and Andrew Booth Jr., and Lewis Cine, let's be honest, the Minnesota Vikings defense would be amongst the worst in the NFL regardless. Good thing for the Minnesota Vikings is the fact that this is a very good cornerback class coming up. And from watching this game, from looking at the Minnesota Vikings defense, it looks like quarterbacks aren't even throwing in Patrick Peterson's direction anymore. Patrick Peterson just it looks like he's shutting down an entire side of the field, but in reality, it's just the fact that we have Duke Shelley, Chandon Sullivan out on the field, Caleb Evans out there, and they're gonna target these guys. They're going to target these dudes, and I give a lot of credit to a Caleb Evans, and he had an acceptable game, him being a rookie corner in this matchup. But at the end of the day, do you really want a Caleb Evans to be your starter right now? Now, he's done a fine job, don't get me wrong, but as of right now, we have to look to how we can upgrade at this corner position. This needs to be the main focus for the Minnesota Vikings, and this is about the 4th or 5th year in a row that I'm saying that this has to be the biggest focus this offseason. Great news, once again, it's going to be a very good cornerback class. Vikings don't need to be picking in the top 10 this year to find a lockdown corner like they would have this last year with some big name corners in the top 10. And then positives on offense, I'm going to say the fact that this blocking game has improved a lot since the Dallas matchup. Now, once again, the Minnesota Vikings are playing a very good Jets defense. Now, it's hard to say that because the Jets defense was so bad for very long, but Quinn Williams has really stepped up. Carl Lawson from the edge. There's the other guy who has the 2 last names with a hyphen. I can't remember his name right now. Another dog. I mean, they're able to get to Kirk Cousins whenever they want, and the Minnesota Vikings did as good of a job as you can protecting for Kirk Cousins with some additional blockers. And this is what I said with the Minnesota Vikings, what they should have done a long time now. And it's great to see that Kevin O'Connell has caught up to this and added additional blockers. We're seeing more 2 tight end sets. We're seeing more I formation with our boy, CJ Ham. Have to hit the hammer every time I mention CJ Ham because he is an X factor on this Minnesota Vikings. The secret ingredient to Dalvin Cook's success is Ham. Ham and Cook make a very good combo. And I do love to see the I formation. Obviously, in today's day and age, you don't see it very much. You see more 11 personnel, and that's what you've seen with the Minnesota Vikings more this season. But as I mentioned, the Vikings have to continue to up workload from these guys who are good at blocking. That being CJ Ham, that being Johnny Munt, that being TJ Hawkinson, more 2 tight end sets, more I formation is what's helping this Minnesota Vikings out, especially when Christian Darrisaw is not playing and you have Blake Brandel stepping up at left guard or left tackle. Still, blocking game was great, not only protecting for Kirk Cousins, but able to get going in the run game. Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison had gaps all day long. I believe Dalvin Cook went untouched on multiple first downs, which is you don't see very often under this Minnesota Vikings 2022 offense. Still, run game stepped up. Pass game wasn't all that great. Run game stepping up is what's held this Minnesota Vikings in check in this game, and they got 27 points on a very good Jets defense, which you love to see. On to the negatives for the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to stay into the offensive side of the ball here, and we're going to say Kirk Cousins. Okay, Kirk Cousins. I don't understand what is with this quarterback and why he is so good on 4th quarter. And I would much rather, don't get me wrong, having a quarterback who is clutch in the 4th quarter is a great thing. But when you struggle throughout 3 quarters, it's a pain because every week I get put in the same situation. My blood pressure is high. My anxiety is high. The Kirk Cousins and this Minnesota Vikings team is the reason why I'm probably going to be dead by the time I'm 40 because Kirk Cousins, again, first half, not great whatsoever. Underthrowing his targets, overthrowing his targets. And then all of a sudden, game's getting close. 3rd quarter, Minnesota Vikings get shut out. Don't score a single point in the 3rd quarter. Game's getting close. Kirk Cousins turns into the best quarterback in the NFL, throwing dimes, consecutive first downs. I believe he had 3 consecutive first downs in the 4th quarter, while only throwing 3 completions in the 1st quarter. And then obviously the dime to Justin Jefferson for the final touchdown, final score for the Minnesota Vikings of this game. I can't wrap my head around the fact that this quarterback is so good on 4th quarter, but for some reason he can't stay the same quarterback throughout the first 3 quarters as he's throwing behind his targets, over his targets, under his targets. I mean, you saw Justin Jefferson drop a pass, and you can put the blame on Justin Jefferson. That ball was thrown behind Jefferson. So while Jefferson 9 times out of 10 does make that catch where it was a drop pass, still, the ball was thrown behind Justin Jefferson. Quarterback 101. Throw the ball in front of your targets where they're going. That way you can hit them on full stride, and they can turn that into a large gain. Jefferson, one of the best receivers, if not the best in this league, who hauls in just about every catch. That was the rare drop from Justin Jefferson, but you have to put some of the blame on Kirk Cousins there. That being said, Kirk Cousins, like I say many times, he is good enough. And a lot of people say that Kirk Cousins is not clutch. Just based off of his primetime performances alone, people will make that claim. However, we have seen Kirk Cousins win multiple big games with this Minnesota Vikings team. We've seen him win big games not only on primetime, but in the playoffs as well. When the Minnesota Vikings went on the road to take on the New Orleans Saints, Kirk Cousins had, in my opinion, the best day of his career. So, like I say many times, Kirk Cousins is good enough. I would put him on the same tier as I would put Matthew Stafford, and Matthew Stafford Stafford just won a Super Bowl with Kevin O'Connell as his offensive coordinator last year. See what I'm hinting at? It's kind of the same situation here. I would put Stafford and Kirk on the same tier of quarterbacks when it comes talent-wise. As that for the Minnesota Vikings, we have to see Kirk Cousins have the performances we have seen in fourth quarter all 4 quarters. And that would help out the Vikings so much, as for once, it would not come down to the wire. This being said, Kirk Cousins, 5 fourth quarter comebacks for the Minnesota Vikings. Impressive. Just please stop trying to come back from the fourth quarter. In this game, it wasn't a fourth quarter comeback, but it still came down to the wire. Minnesota Vikings, I believe, did hold a lead. Yeah, they held a lead throughout the entire game, but it still came down to the final plays of the game, which you don't like to see. So that's really all the Vikings need to fix here. You need to fix your defensive scheme. You need a Cam Dantzler to be back this week or next week. I don't care. Just have Cam Dantzler back whenever he is ready to play. Once your defense can come together, once your Ed Donatel learns how to run an actual defensive scheme, which, let's be honest, that's probably not going to happen, Minnesota Vikings can fix what they have, the problems, or solve some of the problems they have on defense right now. Because as I've mentioned before this season, I have little to no faith for this Minnesota Vikings secondary, but that doesn't say that this Vikings secondary can't look better. We can't have the most passing yards allowed in the NFL when we have played some quarterbacks who just simply are not that great. Mike White, very inexperienced quarterback. Skylar Thompson looked like a beast against us. I mean, you had Andy Dalton against the Saints throwing all over you. Andy Dalton. I mean, come on. Vikings defense, Vikings secondary has to step up and has to improve going forward. Still, let's give some credit to this Vikings secondary. 3rd and 4th down looked great. Looked great into the red zone. And that's where we're going to give our player of the game, Cam Bynum, once again. This Cam Bynum kid has been, how many player of the games have I given this kid? He's looked so good for the Minnesota Vikings, and 7 total tackles, 2 pass deflection, and a game-winning interception in this game. Great from Cam Bynum. Huge play. He gave one of the pass deflections led to a Harrison Smith interception, tipped the pass. It went into Harrison Smith's hand. Would have had another interception, but he collided with a Caleb Evans. Should have been another interception there. That ended as a pass deflection. So in reality, Bynum could have had 3 interceptions in this game. Still just a stud. I'm really interested to see how this safety position unfolds with the Minnesota Vikings, because we didn't draft Lewis Cine to be a backup. We drafted Lewis Cine to be the future at free safety for the Minnesota Vikings. As of right now, you don't need to rush Cine back whenever he's healthy. Hope, please, for God, this guy can be healthy as soon as possible. But still, down the line, I'm looking at a Lewis Cine and Cam Bynum safety duo, and hopefully this can continue to go forward. I feel like Cam Bynum would be a stud strong safety. He is a hard-hitting safety, or a Lewis Cine would be a stud strong safety, as he's a hard-hitting safety. Him alongside Cam Bynum would be a great duo. And once again, can we give more credit to Rick Spielman? Because I have said many times, and I said this going into the offseason, Rick Spielman gets way too much hate. And I mean, Rick Spielman has a long list of bad draft picks in the first round throughout the first half of his tenure with the Minnesota Vikings. Into the second half, he ended up getting players like Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw in the first round. But he was this mastermind when it came to day 3 of the draft. Cam Bynum, we got in the 4th round, I believe it was. Incredible for the Minnesota Vikings. Looking at it, final prediction, or not final prediction, next week the Minnesota Vikings will travel to Detroit for the final NFC North battle. Well, I mean, NFC North battle, like 2 competitive teams are in the NFC North right now. Sunday, 12 o'clock Central Time on Fox. Minnesota Vikings will have their first road divisional opponent to play. It is week 14, and we're finally going to head on the road to play a divisional opponent. Minnesota Vikings against Detroit Lions. Great. Minnesota Vikings have just swept the AFC East and don't have a good record so far against the NFC East, but let's hope we can at least break even with them with the win over the Giants going forward. Vikings will have to win out at this point if they want to win the number 1 seed in the NFC North, or in the NFC, because as of right now, Philadelphia Eagles are beating up on their opponents, and I don't know if the Eagles, I very doubt that the Eagles are going to lose more than 2 of their next 5 games. So let's hope that they lose 2 of their next 5 games. If they do lose 2 of the next 5, Vikings win out, we will get that 1 seed. We will get the first round bye, and that would be huge. Minnesota Vikings, Detroit Lions. With the win over the Lions, they secure the NFC North for the first time since 2017. Let me know what y'all think.